Hi everyone, I'm Catherine, the artist behind Bigelow Fine Arts. Today I am working through more of the coral on this meteor. Did you start your coral yesterday? How are they coming along? I just started up on MeWe and would love to build a coloring community there with everyone. If there is enough interest, I'd love to start a group for everyone to share their art, talk art, and discuss supplies. It is free to join MeWe and participate. Just skip the free trial. I have my palette beside me, my pencils are sharp, and I'm ready to get going. Come along and join me, and let's color this in together. The palette will be moving around a little as I move around the page. I am beginning with the long waving grass up here, near the top, with a light layer of the light purple pink. I am now just making things up as I move around this meteor. I put in a light layer of the magenta at the base of the grass to give it a shadow. I blend that out with more pink. I then come in with the sepia to add in a shadow at the bottom of the grass that would be cast by the layered coral in front of it. I add in more layers of magenta and pink to blend everything together and bring up the saturation of the color. There is more of this long waving grass under the orange balls, so I hit them up with a base layer of the pink. I bring in the magenta as well to work a shadow around the base of the blades. I decide at this point that maybe the cave should also be this dark magenta. I add in a light base layer over the cave parts. Later, I opt to use the warm gray 5 and sepia to color up some of the other caves. Either works. If you want to wait and see what the other background caves and rocks look like, that is fine. I layer in some pink to brighten up the magenta a little. I add in shadows with the dark sepia where I think they might be. Again, this is a little difficult because the artist provided shadow marks, but the flame is right there, so how much shadow would there really be? I work through the shadows, then add in more layers of magenta followed by more pink. I'm going to go through and try to work up all the finger coral I see in the same blue-green colors as before. I come in with the phthalo blue and put in a base layer over this tiny little patch of finger coral. I layer on some grass green to brighten up the blue. Moving on, there is more finger coral next to the orange balls, and I use the phthalo blue to block that in with a light layer. I'm working light because I am blending other colors on top, and I want the colors to mix into one color and not just look like two colors. I bring in the grass green and layer that on top of the whole coral. I work in a layer of the cobalt green over everything. I bring in the light cadmium yellow for the tips of the finger coral to lighten them up a little more and bring out the green more. I use the blue again, adding to the darker sections of the finger coral, down at the bottom and between the finger sections. More green to blend everything together, but mostly at the tips. I finish off the shadows with sepia, bringing them out more. The shadows are between fingers and along the base of the coral, especially at the bottom where the artist has already shaded off the base. Up to the top here is another section of similar looking finger coral, so I'm putting down a light layer of the phthalo blue over the whole thing. A layer of green, but this time I'm trying to keep the green more to the tips of the fingers rather than over the whole coral. Either way works. I brought in the cobalt green and kept that layer to the base of the fingers. With the yellow, I blended out the tips of the fingers and added more green on top to help them stand out. I feel at this point I am starting to figure out how I want these things to look. I decided to make them a darker blue-green at the base and a light green-blue at the top, where they would be exposed to more light and therefore possibly be brighter. I add more blue to the base before coming in and adding in the shadows with the dark sepia. I lighten up the tips with more yellow and call it done. I head back to the area near the flames where I missed the rest of the finger coral from the first tiny little clump I worked up. So I come in with the blue to add in a base layer. I work up all the little fingertips with the grass green, where they would end up being the lightest. I use the cobalt green at the base, avoiding the fingers that I just hit up with the green. I brighten up the tips with the light yellow, blending it into the green and the blue. I add more of the blue to the base and shadowed areas, darkening them up a little more before coming in with the sepia to make the shadows really stand out. I'm going to go back in with each color again and add more layers to darken the saturation in the colors and make sure I have enough layers on the paper to fill in the tooth of it. I'm not pressing really hard when I do this. I may be using a medium light pressure. It is a little harder than when I put in my base layers, but really not that much more. Further down the flame, there is another clump of this finger coral. I will be working it up in the same way I have been working up all the other finger coral. I begin with a base layer of the light blue, adding in the green at the tips and the cobalt green at the base. I brighten up the tips with more yellow and darken up the base with more blue. The sepia darkens up the shadows, and then I add in a few more layers to blend and bring out each color a little more. This is where I erased the layered coral. If you are happy with how yours looks, great, but I wasn't happy with it for some reason, so I erased it and I'm beginning again. I am aiming for something bright blue. I put down a layer of ivory over both of the coral formations. I didn't get all the old color removed, but I'm not too worried about it. And the paper is able to take the layers I'm applying to it even after I erased a bunch of layers. After the ivory, I come in with the cobalt blue-greenish, adding in several light layers. I just build up the color until I like where it is at. I add in more ivory on top to blend everything together and to keep the blue light. I bring in the phthalo blue and begin adding in some shadows at the base and underside of each of the levels of this coral. I use the light phthalo blue along the upper edges to brighten them up and make them the highlight of the edge of the layers. Here's the sepia to begin adding in the shadows. I lightly block them in and make sure they are looking good. I layer on more sepia as I work up each area. Finally onto a new color. Coming in with the cadmium yellow, I decided to color up this dead tree-like coral in the same red-yellow colors as the first coral I colored up. I begin with several light layers of the cadmium yellow over the whole coral. I came in with the scarlet red at the base and bring a little of it up into the limbs of the coral, mostly keeping it to the under sections and to the middle of the limb, almost like a vein. I blend it out with the orange and also feather out the edges to blend better with the yellow. I make sure to flick a little of the orange and the red up into the limbs like veins. I add in the sepia at the base and at the joints in the limbs for shadows. While I have the red out, I also touch up the first coral I worked on, just to darken up the base a little more and hit spots I might have missed. I move the palette over so I can work on this large clump of finger coral. I begin with a base layer of the grass green. Even though this is the same finger coral as the others, I am working it up a little differently, just to help it stand out from the large clump beside it. After I get the green in place, I come in with the cobalt green in the areas where there are no fingers. I bring in the phthalo blue to darken up the base even more, and especially the edge that is closest to the other coral. I add in a dark shadow here with the phthalo blue to help them stand apart as different clumps. I also add in the blue between fingers. I add more green to brighten up the tips of the fingers and the sepia to darken up the shadows. The contrast between the grass green and the dark sepia is what gives the 3D effect. I'll go through and add more layers to really bring the colors together. Tomorrow I'm beginning to work up the bottom part of the meteor. I really hope you decide to follow along. Please let me know. I'd love to know how your coral looks. I have my social media links below. Find me on Twitter, Instagram, MeWe, and Patreon. Patreon has a short write-up as well as all the palettes I am using and a list of the timestamps. You don't have to support me to see it. If you have any questions or page requests, please leave them below or reach out to me on social media. I put in a list of chapter breaks in the show notes as well as a list of equipment I like to use. If you use any of my affiliate links, it really helps me out without costing you a thing. I want to thank you all so much for coming along and joining in with me on this coloring journey. I appreciate all my subscribers and look forward to more of you joining in and coloring along with me. Please like, share, and subscribe to help that happen. Until next time, happy coloring.